Few things are for sure in this life, but this is. If we live for any substantial amount of time, we will encounter grief due to the loss of a loved one. Not something any of us ever want, and we all handle it differently. This podcast is to feature those who have done purposeful and meaningful things through their grief. These people featured on here are normal folks, just like you and me, who were thrust into a place they never wanted to be in their lives. A painful place. As they moved through their pain, they realized that something worthwhile, something for the greater good, could come out of the unthinkable. I'm sure that none of them would ever consider themselves to be a hero, but when I searched the definition of the word hero, I found this: a person who is admired or idolized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. And that fit. And so it's my privilege to bring you the remarkable stories of these heroes in grief. Hi, everyone. This is Tom, your host for the Heroes in Grief podcast, and the response has been incredible so far, and I want to thank you for that. It's getting out to people, and they're letting us know that it's helping them, and that is what it's all about. I want to make you aware of a way that you can support this podcast without having to spend 1 cent, and that is through affiliate marketing. I've set up affiliate marketing for online shopping. If you do online shopping, then I have links to all the major retailers, most of them anyways, and I can provide them for you so that when you buy online through those links, you'll help support the podcast through the percentages that we get. It doesn't cost you anything more. You just shop like you regularly would on the sites that you love. It's very easy. All you have to do is shop. And that's it. Just let me know the links to the places that you want to shop at, and I will provide the affiliate links so that you can do it. If you want more information on this, you can go to heroesingrief.com. It takes you to the Linktree page where a video explains it in a little more detail. But you can always email me at tom@heroesingrief.com, and I can answer questions for you. But you can support the podcast that way, and it's very easy, very simple, and it doesn't cost you a cent. Isn't that great? Thank you. Now here's today's episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Heroes in Grief podcast, and it's good to have you with us today. Today, I have a special guest, and her name's Christina Stiverson, and she is a certified grief coach. She's also retired from the United States Air Force, where she was an officer, and she's a fitness professional as well, which that would kind of fit with the Air Force stuff, I guess. And she is president of a foundation that's called For Addie's Research, and Addie is her daughter. And her daughter passed away at 3 years old a few years ago. So we're going to hear all about that story. She had a rare cancer. And so Christina has done the foundation now to assist in the research of all that. So is that correct? Right. So yeah. And you're out in Colorado. So I like telling everybody where people are. So they feel a little more in touch, I guess, or whatever. So, but we got in contact again on social media. That seems to be my way of getting a hold of everybody, and in those grief circles and everything. But it's good to have you, Christina. How you doing today?
I'm great, Tom. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's greatly appreciated to be able to tell your story and impact other people. And I wanted to say an additional thank you for having me on. And recording during the month of September, because it's near and dear to my heart, because it's Childhood Cancer Awareness Month in September, and we're doing a bunch of things out in the community. And my daughter actually has this little golden gumball machine that she put up at the local coffee shop. Gold ribbon is for childhood cancer awareness, and she has a picture of her sister, and she's raising money for our foundation. And so it's an important month for us, and it's really cool to be talking to you during September. So thank you so much for that too.
That is wonderful. That's great. I don't believe in coincidences, so I guess it was meant to be that way. And so Addie was your daughter who passed away. You have two more daughters? Is that the rest of your children?
Yeah. So I'll actually tell you a little bit about my story and where my daughters come into play, if that works for you.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it kind of started for us back in 2015, and I don't think any parent is prepared to hear your child has cancer. I know we certainly weren't. I definitely didn't believe that it was happening to us. And I was in complete shock. And our life completely changed in a moment when I heard that word. To be honest, I didn't even, I think, realize that kids got cancer because I was living in a bubble. She was my first baby. And you just, you don't think things like that are going to happen to you. And so I was taking her to the emergency room a lot and being told kind of I was a crazy mother and that, you know, it was teething or different kinds of things, ear infections, stuff like that. And I just knew something more was wrong. So we were living in Alaska at the time with the military, and we came on vacation to Colorado to visit family for Thanksgiving. And that's when she got diagnosed at the Children's Hospital here within a few hours. And I just couldn't believe it because this doctor was looking for more severe things. And I felt like I was listened to, and it felt good to get a diagnosis, but in the same light, you're just in complete shock. You don't know kind of what you're dealing with. And so,
Sure.
yeah, so we began treatment. Excuse me, we began treatment. We moved into my husband's high school bedroom with his parents. And you can imagine, right? We have this pack and play, and we had to take the doors off the closet to fit the pack and play in the room, to have her in there with us. And then my other daughter at that time was 6 months old, and her name's Millie. And so we could take care of Addie. We had several grandparents move in. We moved into my husband's house, my husband's parents' house, and then my parents actually came as well. And so we needed all the help that we could get, starting to go through this. We went through many rounds of chemo. It wasn't really working. And then Addie got listed on the transplant list, for a liver transplant. We were extremely grateful. We thought, you know, this is going to be a life-saving treatment. And we got a full liver transplant, which is a huge blessing. And we thought, this is it. We're going to be home free. There's still challenges when you live with a liver transplant throughout your life, but we thought the cancer would be gone. So then a couple months later, we got tested again, and her levels were rising, and the cancer was just kind of coming back, super aggressive. Yeah, came back in her lungs, and eventually it spread to her brain. And that's when I think we knew we didn't have a lot of time left. And I didn't really want to believe it, till a doctor said to me, like, have you considered taking her on a Make-A-Wish trip or to Disneyland? And at that time, I just didn't, because I had all this hope that we would get a new treatment or something. And I think when it finally set in, we did. We went to Disneyland, and we spent some really good time while she was still feeling well. And then she passed away just after her third birthday on December 20th, 2016. So that makes it pretty hard because it's a couple days before Christmas. Her birthday's in December as well. And so December has been quite a month for us over the years since she passed away. And so, yeah.
Yeah. So, and this is in what year did all this occur, or what year did she pass?
She passed away in 2016.
2016. Yeah.
Yeah.
Never gets easier. That's for sure. You know that. Or it might get a little easier, but never goes away, I guess, is maybe the better way to put it.
Yeah. It's never going to go away, right? And we don't want it to. We really, I had a hard time. So say for the first couple of years, and I think you know this as well, right? This first year, every holiday is nearly impossible, right? You feel, you don't want to celebrate anything, right? Sometimes I would put on a show for my daughter, like, you know, I remember just being present, but not really present, and extremely numb to my grief. That's just the way that I processed it at the time, because I had another daughter who was, at this time, she was a year and a half old, and one thing we did know kind of after our daughter passed away is that we wanted another child. And um, so adoption became an option in our future. And a year after our daughter passed away, we adopted from birth another little girl named Emmeline. And it's beautiful. I really say that having the girls just kind of saved me at that moment. It's what I needed, and they brought me up and gave me purpose as a mother during that time. And uh, they really just it brought me out of some of the darkest times. But I also realized that I wasn't really present.
Hmm.
And that's when I decided after a couple years that I wanted more from my grief journey. And it's when I started looking into things a little bit more.
Yeah, that's powerful because there's that fear all the time of the other children becoming, I think they're called
Hmm.
shadow children or whatever, because so much focus is put on the one that passes that you miss the opportunities with the others, you miss parenting them the way that you should, or things like that. So it's wonderful that you saw the other side of that. Maybe not right away, but that came to you, and so yeah, that's something for people to think about out there. What happens is sometimes you focus so much in your personal grief, and then you're just so wrapped up in things that you forget about, wait a minute, I've still got children here, or I've got a child here that I still have to take care of, and that child deserves all the love that I'm hurting from over here too. So that's important, I think, and that's so great that it worked out that way for you. Eventually, and maybe in the beginning, like you said, you realized that you weren't present, but they were still being, great for you, internally. Like you recognize that too. So, and that's the interesting thing about grief all the time. There's so many different things going on at one time that that's not out of the norm. And I love when that happens when you talk about something like that, because people who listen to this podcast, they're all at different stages, obviously. And, you know, you can pull so many great things out of other people's stories. And for you to, share that struggle that's going on, it's normal. It's okay to be that way. And, we're going to hear even more of where it took you and everything. And that's even more powerful. So, yeah, you go through that. And so you were at a point where you're talking about maybe a shift in what was happening. So, you wanna tell us more about that?
Yeah. So, sometimes when you kind of wonder where the bottom is, you're like, how can,
Mm.
and to be honest, I was having these moments where, and this is real, right? You're driving in your car and you think about it. You're like, if I just drive my car off the road right now and get into an accident,
Yep.
the world would need to take care of me, right? Um, and you desperately want to be present, and you don't know how, right? And you think, is this the bottom? I didn't have to wonder any longer, right? When the bottom found me, I just reached a point where I made a decision that I didn't want to be watching over my life. I wanted to be in my life, and where that these moments were so valuable with my little children. And it was really it happened all during COVID. And so during COVID, I was fully activated with the military, heavy stress on top of me, little kids at home. And I saw this advertisement for Tony Robbins workshop that was virtual, which he didn't typically do virtual workshops, and it was affordable to me. And so I kind of investigated it, and I really connected with it, right? I was in the right space. It was what I needed at the time. And I was looking for this new identity after my daughter died to become more present in my life. And some things that he said really resonated with me. So I just wanted to share a little bit about that with you. It really happened in two different stages for me, from two different ideas that I picked up from just quotes that he said, and I translated them into my life to kind of make a powerful transformation. And the first one was having to do with transforming my worst day into kind of my most proud moment. And I know this sounds really crazy, but if you think about it, it doesn't even make sense, right? But
Yeah.
if you could turn your worst day into your best day, then you don't have a worst day anymore. You know, it just absorb that for a second, right? It's not going to be easy, and it's a meditative transformation, perspective changing exercise that you kind of do with yourself. And so for me, I replayed and relived the day my daughter died over and over and over till I could see things from a different perspective. And I never really thought that this was going to be possible. I just internalized the quote and I thought, how can that make a difference for me, right? Here's this world renowned personal growth specialist that's helped millions and millions of people, and how's it going to help me? So I thought, one of the worst day of my life was the day my daughter died in my own mind at the time. But to be honest, after I reprocessed it so many times and thought about all the details, I realized that that was actually the strongest moment of my entire life. It was the most courage I've ever had. It was the proudest of myself I've ever been, was on that day when these hospice nurses coached me to help my daughter pass away peacefully in my own house. And I never thought it was possible. I'm not a nurse. I never thought I could do this. And they gave me this moment, this opportunity, this way to help my daughter in a way that I had never helped anybody before. And I really reframed it. I value them so much. Being a end of life nurse, I thought, gosh, I remember asking them, like, is your job just so hard? And they said, I get to be with people at the hardest time in their life, and I feel really good about that. And, I'll never forget, Oprah Winfrey said this. She interviewed people a long time ago about job satisfaction, who was happiest in their job. And I remember hearing how shocked I was when she said the happiest person in their job, this man was a funeral director. And I remember thinking, how is that possible? And he came on and he said, it's because I help people at their darkest time, and I feel good about that. And I thought about that when I thanked the hospice nurses, and all of this in the moment. You're not realizing this. This took me years to kind of relive and replay this and come to this conclusion. But once I did, man, was I grateful to these hospice nurses, to the people that just gave me that power, that courage. And I've been in the military. I retired last year for over 22 years. And any recognition, Medal of Honor, anything I could have received was nothing compared to how proud I feel. It was my proudest moment, helping her die peacefully in my own house. I did that. And so I really was able to change that moment for me. And I don't see it as my worst day anymore. I see it as one of my best days and my most proud moments, where I had strength and courage that I never thought I could have. And that carries me through the rest of my life. And that for me was the first powerful revelation. And it was just a mindset transformation. And so now I knew that it's possible, right? To do great things just by shifting your mindset. And he said something else. The second thing that he said that really caught my attention was this concept that people hold on to pain till they find something they value more. And I sat back and I thought about it. And as a grief coach, I've kind of learned over time that people, you hold on to the pain because you think you're holding on to the connection. Right? And
Yep.
and I think you know this too, right? And so people hold on to this pain till they find something that they value more. And I valued right then and there raising my family and being present with my girls more than living a life of devastation and pain and letting it slip away and not being grateful for what I had in my girls right there. I didn't want to miss a moment, right? And so when I ended up reconnecting with my daughter kind of and transforming the pain into more of a legacy and more of a powerful connection that I have with her now, that really it's not painful, it's empowering. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel all of her energy all the time. That's not to say that I don't have, tough days, tough moments, things like that, but I feel more positive and grateful energy every day than I do the pain.
Let
And
me
so,
sorry,
yeah,
let me stop you there because it's I don't want to forget this point. And you're talking about your particular circumstance, and it's unique, and you did have that precious time. Now, you don't know this, but I was a spiritual care director at hospice for 3.5 years. So, and people
yeah,
used to ask me that all the time about the work. And I said, actually, it is rewarding to be
hmm,
honored to be brought into people's lives at the most poignant time of their life, whether it's the one who's passing or whether it's the family. And it's powerful. It really is. Now I want to ask you this because here's my circumstance. All right. So what would you say to me if, well, you're a coach, so you should be able to answer this. I'm putting you
yeah,
on the spot. All right. So I found my son, Jeff, that morning and upstairs in bed. And, so that's the scene in the day that I live with. And I was thinking about, processing it the way you were talking about as you were talking about it. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I have anything in there. Where would you tell me to go in something like that? Because the rest of that day, I can tell you how that day went. That was six something in the morning, 6:45 in the morning. And the rest of the day, I was in complete devastation, of course, sitting at the dining room table, eventually opening the bottle of Tito's and sitting there with family and people and just being in, who knows, numb, totally gone,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
totally absent. And so what would you say to someone, because there's more people probably like me than what experienced what you did. So what do you say to someone like me?
So it's actually a process, and I've done this with several of my clients, right? And you have to relive the moments. You really have to go through some of the pain of reliving the moments to pick out certain other moments that you're not seeing. You almost have to go through it. It's like a meditative process where you're looking at it from an outside perspective. And to be honest, it's having a coach ask you some questions throughout the the process while you're walking me through it, right? While you're telling me the story. So, for instance, I had a client whose son was tragically hit by a car, and she said, it's just a tragedy. Like, there is no good in his death, right? Like, this is absolutely the worst. Um, but when we processed the story, right, we found out that right after that, he became an organ donor and he saved 8 people's lives that day. And now, when she tells the story of her son being a hero and saving lives versus the tragedy of the car accident that happened. That's something she can't change, right? But she can bring out some other details that maybe she wasn't thinking about at the time about who he helped and how he became a hero in that moment from what happened during the situation. And she didn't even see that in in the time, when we were talking, until we went through this several times and asked all of the questions. And that's when we realized that, and what happens there is then it makes it easier to tell your story, because she was really struggling to tell her story because it created so much emotion. It was so hard for her to tell.
All right.
But once we were able to reframe it, and she was actually really proud of her son as a hero, and she wasn't um, feeling resentful for him that he crossed the street when he wasn't supposed to. She is able to tell it with a different energy, And she really feels now that he's the hero of the story, and she's really grateful for him and the time and the people that he saved. And it's just a different perspective. It's still the same events that happened. You just reprocess them in a different way. So I think if we relived that day for you, there's something there that an outside perspective could see that maybe you're just not seeing.
I think
That's all it is.
I was I was surprised that we got into this role playing actually, but not really role playing even. But as you were talking, I realized something, and that was that day is not really has to be the focus of it, because I will tell you what's occurred in my life since, and I'm 19 months out right now. So a lot of people say, "Oh my gosh, how are you doing what you're doing even at this point?" And I can tell you that it's come through a spiritual awakening with me. And you talked about meditating and things like that. I've gotten into that, and mindfulness, and understanding that Jeff is right here with me, living on, and I'm going to live on as well. And so I have had a complete spiritual awakening, even though I was a pastor for 15 years, and
Right?
I don't see it that way anymore. It's a total different way. And so, yes, my life has been changed for the better through the occurrence of it. And that would be horrific for some people to say. But what I realized as you were talking is that, like I was, and like when I asked you, a lot of people will sit there and focus only on the events of the day, and which I have no good things to say about, of course, with what happened with me. But as you process it and you go on and you realize what the event has meant to you or done for you or whatever the case is, then that is the realization of what you bring out. Am I correct?
Yes, yes. So, and there's probably a trigger that happens for you. And so for me, here's how I reframed another thing. So people used to say to me when I would tell my story, I can't imagine anything worse than losing a child. And I would just be triggered. I would stop dead in my words. People would say, I'm sorry, all the things, because grief is just not normalized in our society. People don't always know what to say. But so after a little while, I kind of came up with an answer of how I wanted to think about that. So when people would say to me, I can't imagine anything worse than losing a child, right? I could come back and I could say, I can imagine two outcomes that would be worse. And it's if my oldest daughter, Adelaide, who we called Addie, never came into my life for 3 years and 17 days, that would be worse. It would, right? And then not truly living my life to the fullest in honor of her, that would also be worse. So there's always something that can be worse. So when people say, I can't imagine that. Well, one, I don't need you to.
Yeah.
But two, my life, I am at a point now where I'm more grateful for the time I had with her than the time that I didn't. And that's an amazing perspective to have, to for me to just go on in my days and be able to be a positive force for my girls right now and a positive force in the world. And I do think that gratitude has really brought me there. And as a side note, I will tell you that I did Tony Robbins priming exercises for 21 days straight. And it's like a 13-minute meditation process. And it really goes through gratitude, and it transforms your mind, and it makes you think about, remember events, be grateful for events. It focuses on breathing, and every day you're thinking about something new, right? And it's just bringing things up. And I think that really helped me, and it became a habit. It was a practice. I did it for 21 days every morning when I got up at 5 a.m. And I think it just brought the sense of gratitude out, where I've kind of crossed this bridge of grief that I don't feel like I'm ever going to go back, right? If we focus on what we've lost, we can never fully appreciate what we have. And I truly believe that. And now I feel more empowered by my journey. And I feel like my entire life is different because of Adelaide, and I'm a different person. And I don't ever think of my life without her. I always include her as someone in my life that made me a better person. And when you cross the bridge of like emotional acceptance, it's like I go back and I relive some of those times, but I always have something come up for me that makes me more grateful that she was in my life than being devastated that I lost her. And that just really, it really, really helps me. I truly believe in the ancient proverb, right? It's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. Sounds kind of cliche, but I truly believe it. And it took a lot of time to find that. And you have to really want to be in that space of living your life in honor of this person and thinking about legacy and all kinds of things like that.
Yeah. And this does not take away from those experiencing grief. I always like to, I've been very sensitive with this podcast, and,
Yeah.
I'm glad I am because, you know, I've been, you know, blessed, I guess, with being where I'm at, you know, wherever it is. It's not that I don't have grief. I still do. And I still cry and I still do those things at
Yeah.
times. But, you know, I'm very sensitive to those people who just haven't taken the steps yet to get out of that
Mm-hmm.
and get out of that painful grief. And I just want to encourage you all that you can, and
Yes.
it's whatever way fits for you in all of this too. And I never intended, I mean, I definitely have these spiritual beliefs about our consciousness and everything now, and meditation and all those things, but I didn't intend for the podcast to become something that always dwelt on that, but it's just coming up again and again. And I think it's a simple thing, you know, if you, I believe that it's our vibration levels, and those may seem like a crazy words to some people out there, but we're all vibration. Everything is energy. And so if you bring positive vibration levels in around you and from you, then you're going to attract more positive. If it's negative, then you're going to attract more negative. It's like a magnet kind of, I guess, or, you know, you could look at it that way. So just take your baby steps in these things. You hear it from so many people in different ways, and it's your shoe fits you, not our shoe fits you, you know. So just that's what these resources are all about too. I started hearing about all these things and ways that people go about it, and I wanted to say,
Yeah.
wait, people are all different. They need to hear all these things, and that's the idea, some of the idea behind the podcast, that, you know, maybe it'll resonate with someone the way that it occurred for you, you know, and the things that you offer and things like that. So, you know, you know, it just always hits me, and I want to encourage those people out there who are
Yeah.
struggling, you know, that because it's easy
Yeah.
for us. We can give you like, oh, I feel, you know, this is great. You can do this. And that other person sitting there going, I'm not there, you know? And so
Yeah.
just know that we were and still are at times. I mean, there's just no way around it. I had a hard cry recently that just came out of nowhere. And I was like, wait, that hasn't happened for me in a while. What's going on? You know, and it's just
Yeah.
us. It's your humanness. Those things are going to happen. But if you replace it with more, like you said, and, you know, I took grief educator through David Kessler, and he says, eventually you have more, you remember with more love than pain. And so that can take on many
Yeah.
forms, like you said, you know, and yours is showing it all around your family, you know, with your daughters and everything, and living that legacy in that regard. And well, everybody has their way of doing that, right?
Yeah, and I am really sensitive to my story is now this is going to be 8 years this December, right? So this definitely takes time. I was where everybody else is sometimes in those first couple of years where the numbness takes over, you're down in the darkness of grief, and like you're just sometimes I truly believe you have to sort of get to that bottom to rise up, and you'll know when it's that time. I truly believe I had to live through those years of tough times to be where I'm at today. And what I'm hoping that people get out of this is that there is hope through time, that you can get to a place where you're fully living your life, and that those moments have to happen because they define who you are at the time. And you need to give yourself grace to have those grief bursts and meltdown in a grocery store. And for me, it's always when people ask, how many children do you have? Do I say 2 or 3? And so that used to throw me for a total loop. And, until you process those moments and why they trigger you so much, you're in it. And I want people to know that grief is not a weakness. Because you're experiencing grief and because you're going through these grief bursts, everybody's grief is unique. And you should give yourself grace to process it however you need to. But it's a testament to the amount of love that's present in that relationship with the deceased. It's not a weakness. And I think when you can realize that, and give yourself grace that you're holding on so hard to the pain because it's how much you loved that person. And it's going to come with some pain until you can kind of figure out that you no longer want to be connected through the pain. You want to be connected in a different way.
Yeah.
And that's a really big decision.
Yep, you'll never lose the love. Don't worry about that. All right. You think that if the pain lessens that you're losing the love. You can't lose the love. You're not going to lose that. So don't worry about that. I love your energy, Christina. You're very relatable, and I think that's going to be exciting for people. So what's the name of your website? You got a website going with some of your offerings?
Yeah. It's called graduategrief.com, and I offer just a couple of programs for people. Mostly I write a blog, I offer resources, I offer individual coaching and group coachings where you can meet other mothers that have lost children. And that's just a added benefit. I have specific exercises and meditations and things that we go through when you connect with me. And some of it is really about just consciously thinking about things that don't come up a lot in grief and really taking an active role in pursuing your grief journey that some people don't always realize that they could use, right? Like even just thinking about ways to honor your child. And, one of the things that came up for me during this is there's creating a legacy for your child, but also thinking about your own legacy. And I will tell you, Tom, when this came up for me was very shocking. And if you don't mind, I will share just a very quick story, and you might find this interesting, about a class that I took that really enlightened more for me. Do you have a few more minutes?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So a few years ago, and you probably know this in the grief world, that people around you from your grief groups, a lot of us get involved in grief things, like ways to help other people, because it helps us too.
Yeah.
And one of my friends became a grief end of life doula.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so she did like a trial class with us, and she got a few people from our grief group together, and she said, I want to try this. I have a model for it. And I found it so fascinating. And I'll give you like the couple minute summary of kind of the revelation that came out of it for me. So I called it kind of like a death class, right? And super weird, right? Because, I don't know if you know, but now they have these things called like death cafes and stuff where you go talk about this stuff. And I actually thought this was going to relate to the death of my daughter, but it didn't. It actually related to my own death. And she was kind of approaching it from a standpoint of, you get this terminal illness and you have time to think about your death. But for me, the way I processed it was I thought about it as a sudden death, right? Like none of us ever know if we're going to be here tomorrow, if I'm going to get into a car accident tomorrow. And I think that creates a lot of fear of living, right? And so for me, I went through this class and we talked about like 5 domains. And it was all of these important questions that I had not really thought about to write down and tell people. And I will tell you that the 5 domains that she came out with were the mental domain. So kind of what do you value and what do you want people to know about you? And one of the biggest things in the mental domain was, do you have anybody that you need to forgive? And like when you're going through this process, you're actively committing to yourself to say, if I were to die tomorrow, I wouldn't want loose ends with things, right? There's someone I want to forgive. I want to go through that process. And I really want to be in a good place of acceptance for myself, where if something were to happen tomorrow and I didn't have the time to fix these things, that I would be at peace. And so fortunately for me, I didn't have to go through that step. It's just one question that really resonated with me, but I didn't have to go through. But there were people in the class that made that call that day that said, I'm going to forgive this person and I'm going to call them and talk to them about it. I'm going to be at peace with it. And all of this it's a little bit hard. It's a little bit like to think about your own death, right, is a little bit difficult, but I found it really empowering because I thought to myself, if I put a few things in place other than just having a will, which some of us do and some of us don't, because I was in the military, I always had my will in place, but it was so much more than that. The practical domain is like, what do you envision happening, right? Communicating, writing down or telling people what you want for a service and things like that. There's an emotional domain about, do you want to say anything to anybody that you wouldn't be able to say after you had passed away, right? Like writing letters to my daughters or communicating messages that I want them to know. And the physical domain was a lot about more things have the way you want to die. And then spiritual, which I think this would really resonate for you, right? It's what do you believe and what do people know about you? Because sometimes the way people are going to treat your death is the way they want, not necessarily the way you would have wanted. And so in just a quick summary, what I will say that this class brought to me was I could pass on a legacy of life to my family that felt empowering, and I feel more fearless in my life. I feel more free to live happily, live my life. I don't panic about certain things that, could be dangerous or something. I'm not saying I just like freely go jump out of planes, which I already did that in the military, but I'm not saying I take like unnecessary risks. I'm just saying it feels like a freedom that I never had before, where I can truly be present in my current day with my girls without the fear and the worry of what's going to happen after I died. So what I did is we took this class for several weeks. We wrote down all of these answers to all these questions, and I stowed it away in my firebox with my will. And that was years ago, and I don't think about it, but I know that if something were to happen to me tomorrow, my girls would know who I am, what I valued, what I believe, and they would be able to, maybe what I hope is that they would be able to value my life more than the devastation of me being gone. And that's the whole purpose behind it for me. And that's going to be my legacy. And that was so important for me.
Incredible words. That's great. And nowadays you could do it with video too. You could have a video done, and that type of thing. As you're talking about all of that, it just brings up again, and you mentioned this, the stigma of grief in our society. And all of that, the struggle that people go through with what you're talking about is all due to that, because we've been suppressed our whole lives in the grief realm or whatever. And now I feel the same. My view of death and everything has changed with what I believe now. So, and I don't fear it at all. And I did when I was a pastor. I didn't have that viewpoint of, I know we just crossed the veil now. And so I have no fear. I have no fear. It took away fears of other things in my normal life too. For instance, I drive Uber and this type of stuff. And I used to sit there and, somebody would get in the car and I'd be kind of like, and that's just gone. I mean, what's going to happen is what's going to happen. Of course, you take your steps to defend yourself or whatever, but, you got to use your brain too. You just don't go on, spiritual wave or whatever and that type of thing. But I think, though, the stigma of grief is so huge in everything you're talking about and in all the people around it too. And I'm leaning toward being pushed into possibly speaking places to talk about this because, especially like in a workplace. I give the example all the time. Somebody told me about they had a coworker and they found their husband dead at home from suicide. And so,
Yes.
That person's not right and hasn't been for years. And so that affects so many dynamics around the workplace and everything else. And the people that are around that person, not just that person, but all the people around them. They don't know how to react to them. They don't know how to talk. They don't know how to do this. If we can equip people better, just to understand it and talk about it more, work on their spiritual selves to understand things from that perspective too, or their legacy, like you're saying. And I think a lot of it's involved, the spiritual side and what you're talking about too, and realization and acceptance of all of it. And we're not going to get away from it. Let's put it that way. You can,
Right.
and that gives you a little, that always, I used to hear that in the past and it's like, yeah, right. But then that only lasts about that long. Then you go back into the doldrums of how grief or death is looked at in society. And so, this is all part of the education process of what we're all doing here. And, I've been blown away by people who have been brought to me for this, and you're another one. Just every time I'm like, wow, just blown away by, the avenues for people, the excitement, and that's an odd word to use, I know, but we're breaking the stigma,
Yeah.
right, everybody? And so the energy, the energy is really what it is, and that's a positive energy, and it's a powerful energy. And as you experience that power, and now you're sharing that power with people and seeing it come out of other people too. And that is very encouraging because that's available for everybody out there. And
It's
that's
possible.
it is.
It's
It is.
it's really is possible, and I think that's really what I'm here to say is it's possible for everyone. It takes work, but like you said, the universe has all this energy. I think all you need to do is receive it and um and sometimes transform it. But I want to thank you, Tom, for starting the conversation about grief, right? And the hardest part is that nobody gets out alive in this world, and we never talk about it, right? And for us, the circle of life just happened a little bit differently, right? Like typically people are used to seeing older people pass away, even though it's still tough. And it's weird for us when the circle of life kind of goes the other way and we lose children before our elders sometimes. But it made me realize too that everybody's going to have a time and you never know when that is. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to go through a grief process. It's the most common human experience that everybody goes through, yet it is the most cliche thing to talk about. And it is so hard. I wrote an ebook on my website about, ways to survive and thrive in grief. And it basically talks about, the conversation of grief too, to give grace to people that just don't know what to say. And I give examples about when people say this or like what could be better to say to someone grieving, because I have experienced that when you go into a workplace and let's just say there's 100 people on your team and you ask like, who's lost a loved one that's experienced significant grief? Like 85% of the population is going to raise their hand, right? So we know that this is happening in the background. It's just not something people want to talk about because the discussion is always really morose or I'm sorry or, this must be really painful. But if you think about it, like we're all going to experience pain in our life. It's just a matter of how you handle it. And I think some of the key is building up your resilience because, and for you and I, right now, we're building up our resilience and people that have been through significant grief, you're building up your resilience because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when something painful is going to happen in the future too. I mean, it's just the course of life. And the sooner we realize that this is really part of it, the more conversations we can have around this topic. And I'm so grateful for your podcast that you started it, and you're starting the conversation on grief, and you're talking to people that are in all stages of their grief, because initial grief is very hard. It's okay to not be okay, right? In those stages.
Yep.
But I have been there, and I can empathize with being there, but I've also been on the climb up for several years. And now I feel like I've reached a great place where to show people that it's possible will hopefully provide hope for people that are even in that initial stages, knowing that they can work through some challenges and get to a really good place and be more grateful for the time they had with that person than the time they didn't get. And I think that's just a really key mindset for me that I keep up kind of on a daily basis. And it helps me live in the present moment. It helps me be present with my girls and really appreciate this life that I still have. Because you only get one shot, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That we know of anyways right now.
Yeah. For now, we get one shot on this earth right here. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and you say that, it just proves it again and again, how stigmatized everything is, because,
yes,
you know, and we have to fight our way through that too, even ourselves in growing in this and everything. And you have to fight it all the time. And you talk about, I appreciate you. Thank you, Christina, for talking about, what I'm trying to do with this. I feel I was led to do this, and it's being guided. So I'll leave that there. But I also know that getting in the grief work underground, that's there, because it is underground, unfortunately, is that there's a lot of these podcasts out there. But you want to know what? People don't know. And so, you know, a lot of people have said in response to me when I've connected with them, you know, oh my gosh, you know, this needs to be done or whatever. And I'm sitting there thinking, because I'm a good networker with people online and everything, I could probably mention hundreds of podcasts that cover grief, but people don't know. And that's the whole thing, that right there. It just proves it, that this is just being squelched and put away. Don't talk about that. Don't bring that up to me, you know, and that type of thing. When you can turn this whole thing around if you address it. You know, it's almost like like anything else. You know, if you address it and get to it and get to the meat of it, and then people are going to let out a collective breath, you know, and just go, oh, thank you, you know, and you get that, because everybody's sitting there like, what do I do with this? How do I handle this? What, you know, and just nobody knows. But you can be helped with it. And that's what we all do. We're grief helpers and workers, you know. And so find your place and get it. That's all I can say. Right.
And I will say too, that like my pain is no lesser or greater than anybody else's, right? Everybody's going to experience their own journey, and comparing grief is probably the worst thing you can do.
Yep.
Right. So it's just know that you're on your own unique journey, and that nobody has it better or worse than you, but it's possible for everyone. I love how you put it with the energy in the universe. And I truly believe that, and I feel that way. And I hope that you continue to inspire people with your beautiful story and all of the guests that you have on. And I'm just really grateful to be here today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina. We'll have all your information, of course, in the show notes and everything. Please contact her and get in touch with her. And you've got social media platforms and things too, right? And all that stuff. Yeah. So, So I hope you get lots of people contacting you, because I love your energy. I think that, you know, people can really, you know, be helped through that, you know, and amazing story and amazing help. Thank you, Christina. I appreciate you so much for being on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes in Grief podcast. If you'd like access to any of the links that we discussed in today's show, you can find them in the show notes. There's also a link there to support the podcast if you care to. And there is an email link for me there. I'd love to hear from you and your ideas about the show or what you thought about the show. You really can help out this podcast to get to more people if you subscribe, rate, or review it in whichever way your platform provides. Each week, Heroes in Grief is released on Sunday, so look for new episodes there. Thank you again for listening to Heroes in Grief.